Welcome everyone to another special edition of Story Trading. This is our Sunday night Zooms where we present new VIP ideas or give updates on VIP ideas. So we got a new stock we'll tell you about in just a second. But first, a quick disclaimer. Story Trading is not an investment advisor. Investing in securities involves significant risk of loss. This presentation is being recorded. It will be provided to our VIP members first for a period of 7 days before we publish it on our social media. For those of you who are not familiar with story trading is the practice of understanding market pricing through the 4 pillars of fundamentals, catalysts, sentiment, and technicals. Right now, our community collaborates on WhatsApp and on Zoom, and we are building our own app so we can scale that experience to a broader audience. Our app will be the place to discover, collaborate, and validate market-moving information. You can sign up for our beta test over at storytrading.com. So tonight, VIP pick, man, we've had a great 2021. We just went through the recap on Twitter Spaces. Lots of big wins. Air being the biggest win, up 1,000% in 4 months. Air Test Systems, AEHR. So since then, there's been a huge effort, people looking for the next Air. I mean, I've been inundated on my social media with lots of different ideas. We vet new ideas through storytrading.com/submitvip. So this stock, it's a semiconductor pick. It's INTT. So this was submitted by one of our Twitter followers. We vetted it over at Story Trading among a dozen plus submissions. And we thought this would be a great one to present. The person who suggested it on Twitter was a little bit shy. He didn't want to present. So we sought out an expert in the space and we found Mr. TPR from Trading Places Research. So we'll turn it over to you in just a minute. Mr. TPR, first, really quickly, here's an overview of the chart. These are weekly candles over 3 years. So you can get a picture of where the stock has been. And what we try to do at Story Trading is understand this chart, the ups and the downs, and kind of predict where the future goes by looking at the 4 pillars, fundamental, sentiment, catalyst, and technical. So tonight, I imagine we'll be hearing a lot on fundamentals from Mr. TRP, and through collaboration in the community, we'll fill in the rest of those pillars so we can have a good idea of what might be to come. So I'm going to stop my share and welcome Mr. TRP from Trading Places Research to the community. You there?
I am, and I'm going to start my share here.
Awesome.
All right, so let me back up. That's starting in the middle. Okay, so you guys are story trading. So I got a couple of stories about one stock, which is inTest. This was presented to me by one of the members here who's a longtime friend of mine. And, I spend a lot of time looking at this sector. So I looked into it, and it's kind of interesting. We have 2 stories here for story trading. The first one is just kind of, this is going to be the biggest, we're already in the middle of it. We're already soaking in it. It's the biggest semiconductor investment cycle of all time. Nothing really even is going to come close, I think, by the time it's done. We'll get to why in a second. Story 2 is, this is a company that has a small portfolio of testing equipment. It's kind of low-end stuff, the type of stuff that sticks around for a long time and doesn't need to be replaced. And this is the kind of thing they need, this massive CapEx cycle, right? And so they're taking the cash flows from that and they're picking up some small companies that service other advanced manufacturing end markets. So it's your basic diversification strategy. We're going to talk about Asml, which is their heat induction, but they picked up 3 very small acquisitions this year. Last year. I'm already getting my years wrong. It's January and I'm already getting my years wrong. So slide 3 here. Let's talk about this semiconductor up cycle. You see the headline there. That's from INTT. $152 billion in 2021 in semiconductor CapEx. Now, what we're talking about here is, okay, so you hear in the news Intel's building 2 factories in Arizona for $20 billion. 90+% of that goes into equipment, right? That's what we're talking about here. Part of that is this very mature testing infrastructure, and that's where inTest's legacy, let's call it their legacy business is. Okay, so where is this all coming from? It's coming from, first place, there's a huge historic surge in durables demand, durable goods. And you see the chart here. This is a chart of durable goods as a percentage of all consumption. It was down between 10 and 11% for 10 years. And now it's up 12%, 13%, even as high as 14%. Okay. That difference is like $500 billion in spending, consumer spending. And these durables, many of these durables, come with cheap microcontrollers. Some of them come with high-end microcontrollers. New cars have dozens of these cheap microcontrollers. That's why they're getting so hit so hard, the automakers, is because that's where it's centered, the chip shortage. And cars, again, new cars have dozens of these things in it, right? So this is pushing up demand like crazy right now. This surge in durables demand. So that's pushing up semiconductor demand like crazy. Then the next thing you have happening is, sticking with autos, is that it's not just these cheap microcontrollers anymore, right? You're also seeing where EVs double the value of the chips that go into a single car, right? There's going to be high-end systems on a chip. That's what a SoC is. And MOSFETs are chips that regulate electricity flow. These, of course, are hugely important all over EVs. These are going to be made, I think everyone can agree on this call, out of silicon carbide in the near future. And so these things are going to be, there's going to be much more happening now in this space as well. Okay. And the third leg of this historic surge is now we're seeing just everything has chips in it. If you see that tweet I have reproduced there, that's a $2 chip that has Bluetooth on it that runs a disposable $25 disposable COVID test kit. So that's a single-use chip that gets thrown out after it's used. And there's just, billions of these going out every year now, okay? So those are the 3 legs, right? The durables demand surge, all these new chips that are going into autos, and they're more expensive chips than the old ones. And also just all these little $2, this is actually a fairly expensive chip, this $2 one, because it has Bluetooth, $1, under $1, right, per chip. So this is just going to keep happening, right, on this part, this chapter 3 here. Okay. So the next question is, what happens next? Because traditionally what happens next is a big crash in the semi business, right? And inTest is preparing for that by all these acquisitions, trying to broaden their portfolio into new end markets. So I think this goes through 2022 at least, into 2023. But the thing I watch very closely is what you see there, which is durable goods, the inventory sales ratios for wholesalers. That's what I watch very closely. And what you see there in that chart is one cycle. That's the up cycle, and inventories go down, and then when it gets real crappy in 2019. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that to start jumping up there, that line to start jumping up. And that's when we know that the cycle's about to end. Okay, so that's the first story. Story 2 is these recent acquisitions. Ambrell was from 2017. It's not that recent, and it adds to what they already have in thermals, which is, mostly hot air stuff and cold air for different semiconductor manufacturing processes. You need hot air, you need cold air. And Ambrell makes induction heating equipment, and we'll talk about that a lot more. Z Sciences and the next three were all acquired this year. I don't know that much about them, to be perfectly honest. You see there what they basically do. They still haven't been consolidated in a report, but it adds new life sciences, aerospace, and other, automobiles, other advanced manufacturing end markets besides just semiconductors, which is so cyclical. Okay, so let's talk about what Ambrell brings, and we're going back to autos. Okay, because we're talking about EVs here. Okay, again. So what induction heating is you have a power supply and a coil, and you run a lot of power through this coil, and it heats up a nearby conductive material. That can be aluminum, steel, copper, whatever. And if you're into high-end kitchen gear, you've probably seen induction stoves, which use this on much lower wattage than what we're talking about here. So Ambrell makes these units, and you see the picture there. That's one of their big units, big coil. Those gray cabinets are the power supply units. And that's where I think their advantage is, okay? It's already used a lot. The induction heating is already used a lot in automobile production. Anywhere there used to be heat from flames is now coming from induction heating in more advanced manufacturing techniques. People are trying to get rid of open flames. It heats something up. Induction heating heats something up very quickly in a matter of 4 or 5 seconds, and then keeps it at that temperature as long as you want, right? Right at that temperature, okay? So this is used in all sorts of ways, but the new thing that EVs bring, the two big new things they bring, there's also small things. The first is the whole assembly of the motors and the axles that all go together. The motors sit in the whole axle assembly. And you really need very tight, very, very tight bonds and very, very tight tolerances. And that's what a technique called shrink fitting, which originated back with wheelwrights back in the 18th century. That technique is now widely being used in manufacturing where you need very strong bonds and very tight tolerances. And that exactly describes this axle. So if you're looking at that picture with that giant coil, right, an axle goes in the middle of that. An axle and engine assembly goes in the middle of that, right? So, and that's where it bonds together after it cools down. The other place induction heating is going to get used a lot is in the warming up of chambers to grow silicon carbide crystals for blank wafers. Wolfspeed and onsemi are the end customers there. So, and sizing up their competition here, it seems like they have the widest range from the very small ones for heating up very small parts to the very large ones like you see in the picture for heating up very large parts. And everything in between, they have like dozens of models, and they each have different roles. Let's put it that way. And so it's kind of like if you're looking for a whole bunch of induction heating for different things on a car, attaching glass to steel, attaching plastic to steel, attaching this to that, whatever. It's a one-stop shop because they kind of have the whole line from the biggest one made to the smallest one made and everything in between. So that seems to be, and the other thing is that they, and this is just new, they have a power supply for those big cabinet-sized ones that's smaller. And that's a big request from all industrial customers of all types is less floor space. The equipment takes up too much space. We need less, okay? So that's story 2 is Ambrell in the induction heating. And maybe these, and just to go backwards again, I'm very interested in the computer vision part of videology. I don't know enough about it to really comment on it. But there's definitely some interesting stuff in there, but that's going to take time and execution. Okay. So basically the story is, if you look at, they just started breaking out this multi-market, which is other end markets, and the semi-market, which is their traditional market, right? And so they just started breaking this out for us. And you can see how like the blue block is the semi-market. And you can see how it just is, 2019 and 2020 were terrible. 2021, all of a sudden, it's way up, right? And it's going to come back down again. And that's what they anticipate, I guess, I think. And they want that green block to start growing at a nice steady pace. So that offsets, all the volatility in the blue block there. Okay. And if that happens, you can expect better multiples from them, down the road. So just to sum up, the near-term story is just this insane CapEx in the semiconductor sector and their testing equipment and their end markets there in the semiconductor sector. The longer-term story is about expanding into advanced manufacturing equipment for a variety of other industrial end markets. And the biggest near-term catalyst part of that is the industrial use of induction heating in the Ambrell segment. So I'm going to skip technicals. I'm going to let Ben handle that. My only observation is that it tends to go break the 200-day moving average when the market's moving against it. So that's something to look for when for a buy price. But let's talk about sentiment, because that's an important thing that's going on now, because there's kind of a war going on, if you haven't noticed. And like last week was a perfect example of this just kind of boring versus not boring war. And I use the QQQ and the Dow Jones as kind of my proxies for that. Last week, Monday was a QQQ day. Tuesday, Wednesday were Dow Jones days. Thursday was a QQQ day. Friday finished up on the Dow day. And it's just this like daily rotation back and forth. And it's hard to pin where sentiment is. But, and we're going to talk about catalysts in a second, but the catalysts are there for performance in 2022. And, there's a lot of stretch valuations out there, but people are talking about stretch valuations. I think there's a lot of anxiety amongst professional managers about stretch valuations. But I just think there's just too much cash in high income households to support a kind of serious drawdown that people are worried about. As far as the catalysts go, the quarterly reports for 2022 are going to be crazy. It's going to be backlog, all the, revenue backlog, everything. It's just going to be, it's just going to be off the charts once these orders actually start getting filled. A lot of times, an order gets placed in Q2 2021, and then Intel doesn't take delivery and pay the bill until whenever. It's late 2022. So it's just going to keep piling up this through the year. And of course, I'm going to keep a close eye on looking for this to turn over. And the other thing, just for lack of a better term, is EV hype. They have a couple of angles, including the induction heating, but also drying of batteries and the silicon carbide growing chambers and other little things that, that hook into the general EV hype and put them into that category where they become, collateral to a move in EVs. So that's all I got, except, hi, I'm Trading Places Research. That's it. So
Awesome.
Anything else?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to follow up with a few questions. If anyone else in the rooms have questions, you just raise your hand or put it in chat. Again, how can people find you at Trading Places Research? It's at Seeking Alpha. How's it work?
It's at Seeking Alpha. I can make this PDF available, and you can search at Seeking Alpha for either Trading Places Research or Longview Capital, which is the service I have there. And we can hand out this PDF, and it has links in there.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right. So let me get started with a couple questions. First, I'm going to share my screen here.
Let me get rid of mine.
All right, great.
There you go.
So you see that chart there? Is that showing up?
I see it. Yeah.
All right. So this is a chart on, well, let's see, is it getting cut off? Or how do I scroll down? This is a chart on EV to EBITDA. And it looks pretty low, 9.9 for a sector that's hot, semiconductors and EV. Yeah. You have any commentary on, do you agree that that's low, and where do you think this is going?
Yes. Okay. So like I was saying, so I think of these guys kind of as the supplier of last resort. Their biggest customers, TI, Texas Instruments, they make kind of low tech analog chips. So basically they're and this is for the core semi market, which is how people still think of them, and they're trying to change that, obviously. But their big competitors are, say, Teradyne and Advantest. And customers go to them first. And when they run out of inventory, they go to inTest. That's kind of the way it works. Now, Teradyne and Advantest are out. That's why this is like the perfect time for them, right? Is when things are so tight, they're the ones that step up and create the extra supply that people need, right? At this moment. So they kind of trade low relative to, say, TER. If you could put up a TER up there to compare. Yeah, let's shorten that.
Yeah.
So you see TER is trading significantly higher, it looks like to me. My eyes are going, but it looks like 15, what does it say, 16?
1994. Yeah, almost 20, double basically.
Okay, yeah. So it's, that's their biggest overlap in the testing equipment is Teradyne there. So I think that, I think that makes them, I think you're right. I think that makes them undervalued, in this environment, in any sort of normal environment, no, because they're I don't want to say it horribly, but like they're the low end. They're kind of, they don't make advanced stuff, right? So like if you compare revenue here, add Teradyne back in there, because I want to show you something that happened right in that. If you can make them normalized, yeah. So like, you see how terrible 2019 and 2020 were for inTest, right? Teradyne was still clearing, was still like clearing backlog that, right? And they had to, it's not until Teradyne runs out of inventory that inTest starts going up. Did I say that horribly? You understand what I'm saying? The lag there is that when it starts hitting in 2020, Teradyne just keeps going, right? And it takes a while for inTest to catch up, because they're the supplier of last resort for this type of testing equipment. So to get back to your original question, it is low in today's environment. I would say yes, that's very low in today's, but given the situation today. Okay.
So what about this Asml acquisition and the potential EV business in there? Do you see any optionality upside with that? With EVs, I don't know what percent of revenue comes from electric vehicles, and what's the potential growth there?
Very, very little, very little.
Okay.
Right? So that's their portfolio is primarily what makes them money right now is the story here is that it's an additive thing, right? It's adding on top of what they already have, which is the semiconductor testing equipment and thermal equipment for hot air and cold air, right? And so this would be additive if it gets, I don't think anyone else makes equipment big enough to do that whole axle assembly. They may be the only ones, or they seem like the obvious choice for it, right? So if every EV factory has to buy, and those are 250K, those the top end units, and that's just for the power supply. That's not for the coils. And you may need 12 of those. You may need a dozen of those if you want to assemble axles in a really get production going, right? So it really depends on how many of the big units they could sell for that particular job. That's what the upside is. It's that $250,000 unit.
So what is your after, I don't know if you disclose if you're long or not, but what's your personal view? This stock's at 1272 now. What are you looking at as a potential here?
Here's my problem with inTest. It has nothing to do with inTest. It's my problem, which is since about September and October, because of what I said about this massive wave of CapEx into semiconductors, I am just massively overweight semiconductor equipment, right? I could send you a long list. So I don't know that I need another one. But if I was picking a price right now, I'd be looking at that 200-day. Well, what's it now? What's the 200-day at?
Yeah, it's a little bit above where it's at. So it's about 1317, and the stock.
Oh, it's below the 200-day? Was I looking?
Yeah, it's about 40 cents.
Are you looking at weekly or are you looking at a?
No, these are daily.
Those are daily. Okay.
Yeah, it's a little bit below the 200-day.
Oh, I'm sorry. My chart was different. My chart came up different on that when I looked.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Well, that's my observation is there's a lot of noise in this chart. I follow a lot of stocks this size, and when the market's going with it, it goes up a lot. And when the market's going against it, it goes down a lot. So don't overpay, no FOMO on any.
So it sounds like you primarily are looking at this as a sector play, follow the sector, the sentiment, and the technicals rather than.
Yes, sector. Yes, exactly. It's just, they're also they're gonna lose out first as well. Not they're a leading indicator of the whole sector rolling off, right? Because if you can get everything you need from Teradyne, you're gonna go there.
Got it. Okay. Makes sense. All right, we got a question from Sanjay. After the supply chain issues and shortages of chips in 2021, some are speculating that some companies may have double ordered in 2022. There might be excess supply and price deflation in the second half of 2022. Any thoughts here?
I think that, I've thought about that scenario for when all these foundries that were planned in 2021 open in 2022, in 2023, excuse me. But that's also, that's also possible. There was a lot of orders. People just were like, just take what you can get. But there's kind of, as far as this sector goes, the orders are baked in. These are factories that are going to go up, whether the sector rolls over or not. So, it kind of is already happening. Intel is selling. Just think of it this way. Intel's selling off their fastest growing segments to fund this, right? They're selling off Mobileye to raise $50 billion, which after taxes probably gets them something like 3.5 foundries, right? 4 foundries, something like that. That's the math they're doing. So this is happening. right? And the question is, does it keep going? Many people are arguing that it's not going to be cyclical anymore because of the autos and because of all these non-durables that are coming with semiconductors now. That it's no longer going to be cyclical. I don't agree with that. But if I had to guess when it rolls over, I would say right about the time those Intel factories open up in Arizona in 2023. If I had to guess right now.
Fascinating. Good conversation. Learned a lot about semiconductors here. I assume, let me throw you a curveball maybe you weren't prepared for. I assume you know the story about Air Test Systems, right? AEHR?
Yeah, sure.
So they have earnings Thursday. Just curious, your perspective on earnings, and there's a lot probably baked into it. They didn't even report like a quarter yet with all these orders. So what's your take on the opportunity with the stock at this point at these levels with earnings?
Well, it's been on a wild ride, and I kind of took the week off, but I guess it's back up at what, like 23 now or something?
24.18.
I took the week off. It was at like 15 and a half. All right. So anyway, at this price, I wouldn't buy it. I like it at anything over 21, and I'll tell you why. Because, everyone's focused on, they have a really interesting role in making silicon carbide happen, right? Which is that they make there's a lot of failure in silicon carbide production, and they reduce their testing equipment reduces the cost of failure. But their machines, what are they called? The Fox NP, is that the name of it?
XP, that's one of them.
XP, yeah, okay. So
XP, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So anyway, that thing holds big wafers. It doesn't just hold silicon carbide. So it holds all sorts of wafers, silicon wafers, and the big ones, which is what everyone's preferring now. And I just kind of think everyone's going to get some experience with this. The way these things tend to work in this business is you buy a machine for one reason, and then you go, maybe we should try it out on that line because it works really good over here, and things kind of build. And I have a feeling it's going to get started to use in a lot more testing situations than just in silicon carbide, because it just makes a lot of sense the way it reorganizes the post-fabrication testing process into, the wafer, testing by wafer and burn in by at the wafer level. So I think that's more of a long-term thing. So they're going to make these deliveries in 2021, and all these orders we've been seeing in the news that make the stock go up, 80% in a week. And what happens when customers get them is the key, because that's when they start figuring out other things to do with them. And then they start thinking about buying more and telling their friends. So I think they may have a lot of runway here beyond just the short term. Everyone's going to move to silicon carbide for these MOSFETs for EVs, which is, the short term story. And I think there's runway there too. But I don't like it. What'd you say? 24 what?
24.18.
Yeah.
Gone from 16 to 24.
I usually recommend it. I usually recommend it below 22. So.
All right, great. We'll see what happens with earnings this week. We just had a Twitter Spaces before this where we're talking about the Tesla beat and what that means for sentiment in any stocks that have EV exposure. I would not be surprised to see this thing up 10-15% tomorrow, but we'll see
I'm glad. I was gonna ditch this whole stock at 22, and I'm glad I didn't. Anyway,
you got a follow-up question from Sanjay. If you don't mind sharing because I guess he sees how expert of knowledge you have in the semi industry. You don't mind sharing your top names in the semi industry?
Well, number one's ASML. Have you guys talked about that at all?
Nope. Okay,
so ASML makes the most important machine in the world. The extreme ultraviolet lithography machine. It's what It's what's making high-end chip. You know, Moore's law was lagging for years, and it picked up in 2018, right at the time that ASML started selling more of their extreme ultraviolet lithography machines. These things are giant. They have to ship them in 3 different parts to get them inside of a 747 cargo plane. They cost over $100 million. That's $100 million a piece. Intel's probably putting it, I think they cost, there's 2 models. I think they cost 125 and 160. Intel's probably putting a dozen in each of the new factories, if not closer to 20. So the story here is they've only sold like 140 of these things, right? And that's only to 2 customers, TSM and Samsung. Now they have a 3rd customer and maybe more coming down the road. The 3rd customer is Intel. I may have mentioned that they are selling Mobileye to send like 10% of the Mobileye deal is going to ASML's top line. This is what I'm talking about. Like 10% of that what they clear from Mobileye will go into ASML's top line. Think of it that way. And it's not
Yeah,
just,
look at that. I got the revenue chart in there. Look at that, 21
it's
billion.
it's going to keep going like that. I think anything under 800 there, they make the most important machine in all of semiconductors, maybe in all the world. It's what makes Apple's chips so good. It's what makes AMD's chips so good. What makes Qualcomm's chips so good. So that's number one. Let me I'll just run down some of the other names. I love Lam Research. They're another very innovative company. Hold on, let me get my list out before I start talking out of my ass. Okay, Lam Research, very good. MKSI, longtime fan. KLAC okay, so we're into the testing. There's a whole big testing infrastructure, right? My top 2 names there are Teradyne and KLAC, and you can throw Advantest into there too.
What's the last one?
Advantest, they're European. The ATEYY is the ADR.
Got it.
And just some other names: Form Factor, FORM, FORM, NVMI, Nova Measuring. That's a metrics. That's a measuring. Camtech, Onto Innovation, Kohu, Kaliki and Sofa, Applied Materials. You can throw a dartboard in 2021 on these names I just ran off. You can throw a dart at those names and pick winners. But my favorites, and also TSM, they're the foundry. So,
is there an ETF in this space you recommend?
Yeah, SOX, but they're too broad, in my opinion. SOXX.
Okay.
If I were to recommend 3 names, TSM, ASML, and Lam Research. And I'm going to add a 4th one, KLAC. I'm adding a 4th one, KLAC. Those are my top 4 names going into the year.
There you go. Top 4: ASML, LRCX, KLAC, and TSM. Right there, and you can see those market caps. That's a cool little chart. We'll export this and share it with the community. All right.
And and just again, I think whoever asked that first question about it rolling over in 2022, that's a great question, because it could. And I'm going to be like so on this because I'm so overweight these semi names, that like I'm going to be on this practically every day, because I want to make sure I'm not getting out in front of a disaster, because it also could be a disaster. If this thing rolls over in a way that no one's expecting, right? So there's a very small percentage of that, but Edge cases often happen, as we're learning more and more these days.
All right, sounds good. I appreciate that, Mr. TPR. So we'll be in touch with you, and let us know if this thing rolls over, and we should avoid INTT or any of the secondary names. Make sure to let us know about that.
I talk to Keith Resnick, who's a member of the group here, pretty much every day, so he'll be the first to know.
Okay. All right. All right. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Ben. Had a good time.
Thank you. Yep.
All right.
All right. So, yeah, for the rest of you, make sure to, upcoming events. We got Identiv CEO, INVE, one of the best performing picks we ever had at StoryTrading, just keeps going up and up and up. He is coming back to visit us Wednesday at 4:30 p.m. That's the Identiv CEO. Man, they had a big CVS deal recently with talking prescriptions, and then did a cannabis deal right after that. And the stock just keeps hitting new highs. So we will hear from the Identiv CEO 4:30 p.m. this Wednesday. Make sure to follow us on YouTube and on Twitter for the very latest. And with that, we're going to end the recording and move on to Trade of the Week with our VIP community. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.